Hi everyone, Lior is here, and today I have Dell with me. This is a special episode of Jumpstart Lightning. We are launching HCIBox. Stay tuned. Hi everyone, Lior is here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode, a very special Jumpstart Lightning episode. I have Dell with me. Dell, how you doing?
Good. Great to be back.
Well, Dell, today, like I mentioned, it's a very special episode of Jumpstart Lightning. We are launching HCIBox.
Yeah.
But before we're diving into the weeds, who you are and what is it that you do?
Yeah. Well, I know I've been here before, but my name is Dale Kirby. I am a cloud solution architect in the global partner solutions here at Microsoft. I'm also one of the original members of the Jumpstart team, and really glad to be back on the show today to talk about HCIBox. We're really excited about it.
Dell, we've been riding along for a while now. I think more than 2 years at this point,
Yep.
developing a lot of things in the Jumpstart. And last year when we launched RBox 2.0, you also on the show when we did this, we were talking a lot about the notion of what RBox means to us, why we actually went by and developed this. But the Jumpstart till today was mainly focused. I want to say 99% focus on the notion of Azure Arc, like how do we bring Azure Arc to the masses? But few months back, we started to think about, okay, how do we bring a very critical portion of the hybrid story, Azure Stack HCI, into the Jumpstart? So talk to me about this for a second.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously with Azure Stack HCI, that's Microsoft's first party hardware based offering to deploy edge based solutions that also have full cloud integration. Of course, that cloud integration comes with Azure Arc. And so naturally, when folks are coming to the Jumpstart to explore Azure Arc capabilities that enable all the great, hybrid goodness that Arc provides, it really is a natural next step for them to also want to explore, okay, what is all that hybrid goodness with a first party offering, hardware offering like Azure Stack HCI? What does that look like? How can I start to get familiar and play around with that? And that's really what kind of the original motivation of wanting to bring HCI into the Jumpstart was all about.
And we see, in the screen, I see that you're showing the slide around the challenges and the motivation. Obviously,
Yeah.
there are many challenges, but there's also huge motivation to build this. And
Yeah.
so walk me through the things that are top of mind when it comes to challenges and motivation.
Yeah. So first off, if you want to play around with Azure Stack HCI, you had a couple options, before HCIBox. You had the option of obviously procuring physical hardware and standing up a cluster and then playing around with it that way. That's kind of the natural way is I'm going to do it on physical hardware. And to be
Mhm.
sure, if you can get physical hardware, by all means, go ahead and do that. However, as we all know in the pandemic times, actually acquiring physical hardware can be difficult. We're
Yep.
talking about sometimes very lengthy procurement times, not to mention there's a cost involved. So if you just want to try things out, try before you buy, well, physical hardware doesn't make a lot of sense. So that
Mhm.
brings to the second option, which is virtualized, right? To just virtualize an HCI cluster, for example, in Azure. And there were actually a couple of guides. There were numerous guides actually out there to help folks do this. And I'd say that they had kind of varying levels of um, completeness. Some were maintained, some were not maintained. None of them really had the full Azure Arc integration. And so
Yeah.
this was definitely a gap to have this ability to deploy a virtualized HCI environment that has all the integration with Arc, like things like AKS, like Resource Bridge, obviously like Cluster Insights and things like that. Having that ready to go in kind of a sandbox, one-click deployment similar to ArcBox was
Mhm.
definitely not something that was there. And we saw an opportunity to create that with HCIBox.
And uh, so when we are talking about RBox, right? Kind of I like to say it's the twin brother or the twin sister of HCIBox.
Yeah.
When we're talking about RBox and Jumpstart in general, we have a set of use cases and also design principles that we are following. How does
Yeah.
that meet into HCIBox?
Yeah, great question. So the use cases for HCIBox and ArcBox, I'd say, are fairly similar, right? The goal with HCIBox is to get hands-on as quickly as possible with HCI, including
Mhm.
all the integration with Azure Arc and in the cloud. without having physical hardware, and really without having really much at all other than an Azure subscription and a little bit of time to stand it up. So that's really the core use case. How can we get a sandbox as quickly as we can into someone's hands so they can start trying it out today, start learning today without having to wait for hardware or go through a lot of manual effort using like you might have had to in the past. And so what that enables is, if I can have an HCI environment with full Arc integration and all the bells and whistles in just a couple of hours, well, that's a really great accelerator for things like proof of concepts or pilots. If I need to do a demo or on HCI, I'm going to use HCIBox. And in fact, I've done a number of demos at this point to some early, private preview customers and partners.
Yep.
And so it's great for that. It's great for rapid integration testing and things like that. So a similar use case to ArcBox, but this time specific on the HCI stack and all the great integration with Azure.
So obviously HCIBox, we're releasing this today as part of a public preview. We still have a few things that we need to work on towards GA. You're showing the design principles, which kind of brings me to a comment that you made around the existing collaterals that are out there. Obviously, we're doing a lot of research as we are going and developing, especially with such a heavy effort when it comes to HCIBox. And it's not like we're thinking that they're not good. We're just thinking about this from, okay, how do we do things in the Jumpstart way, which brings a lot of quality guardrails. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, we lay our design principles for Jumpstart out on the website, obviously, and we want to make sure that anything we put, whether it's an individual scenario in Jumpstart, whether it's kind of one of our flagship products like HCIBox or ArcBox, we're going to follow the design principles that make the Jumpstart, what it is, and the value that we think it brings to the community. And so, one, that means anything that we put into HCIBox obviously is either going to be in GA or public preview already. That means there's no private preview features that we're going to include. That makes sure that there's no gates to using HCIBox. Anyone can use HCIBox. Again, all you need is an Azure subscription. It's not limited by private preview access or things like that. Two, and this is core to Jumpstart, we want to make sure that you can't fail, that you minimize the chances for things to go wrong. And so that means, being able to have no dependencies on anything, again, other than the Azure subscription. In HCIBox's case, that means no physical hardware. That's, I think, a very valuable thing. And we also want to make sure that, when we're showing HCIBox, there's a lot that we're talking about, when we think about Azure Stack HCI, there's a lot of great, goodness in there around, that's built on Windows Server concepts and things like failover clustering, software-defined storage, software-defined networking even. And those are all great things that are part of HCIBox. But there's also the cloud integration, right? HCI on its own would not be nearly the value that, it is when you start to fold in Azure Arc and the integration and the tooling like Windows Admin Center. So, I think kind of by adhering to our design principles, we just put that much higher quality of a product out.
Yeah. The notion of being comprehensive, repeatable, reliable, and I always, this is something that I always said to the team, and you and I are talking about this a lot. The notion of you're not going to fail doing this is the number one thing in every development that we're doing. So I think, Dale, at this point, show me the magic. Let's talk architecture. Let's see a demo. What is going on there?
Yeah, first let me show you a quick little video of what it takes to deploy HCIBox. And what I'll mention now is we are in public preview for HCIBox. So to deploy it, you're going to use a bicep template, and that's the offering we're launching public preview with. So let's take a look at what deploying looks like, and I think it's kind of pretty simple, I hope. Well, first thing we'll do is we're just looking at kind of the folder structure of the repo where I've cloned the code down. You can see I'm creating a resource group. Then I'm going to spin up a new bicep deployment, and that's really all I have to do is kick off that deployment. Simple as that. The next step after I deploy it is going to be just to log into the HCIBox client machine, and that's where all my interactions with HCIBox outside of Azure Portal are going to take place. So while that's running, I want to walk you through the architecture of the solution. Let's go to the slide here.
Yeah, it's just PowerPoint, doing its magic. It's all good.
Yeah, powerful. Yeah, you know how it is. It might have been some user error there, but let's walk through the architecture. You can see, as I mentioned earlier, the only thing you need to deploy HCIBox is a Azure subscription, and HCIBox is also fully contained inside of an Azure resource group. And so HCIBox is using something called nested virtualization to kind of make the magic happen. And so what that template that we just deployed is a bicep template that deploys a single Azure VM that is capable of nested virtualization with Hyper-V. And then on top of that Azure VM, we're deploying the HCIBox infrastructure, which includes the actual HCI nodes themselves, which are virtualized on Hyper-V. It includes what we call a management plane that's going to include a domain controller and a Windows admin server and a simulated top of rack switch. And then it, of course, also, once that infrastructure is built out, it builds the HCI cluster, it registers the cluster to Azure, and then it starts to enable the Azure Arc services like AKS on HCI
Nice.
and like Arc Resource Bridge.
Really nice. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, this is like, every time we're working on this type of architecture diagrams, and you're starting to visualize all the code that went into a solution like HCIBox, you're starting to understand, okay, this is very comprehensive. And you're showing me also the automation flow on how things look like.
Yep. Yeah. So like I mentioned, we kick off the deployment, which builds the VM. That VM is bootstrapped with a number of artifacts. And then once that deployment is complete, the user simply logs into the VM, and that kind of finishes the rest of the automation, which includes a number of PowerShell scripts. You kind of see over on the bottom, the lower left there, build the HCI cluster, register it, configure AKS, configure resource bridge. I did want to mention, if it's all right, Lior, a little bit more about the nested virtualization, because it is kind of key to understanding the solution. And so what's happening on that client VM, what we call an HCIBox client, that's the core Azure host. That's what we're deploying with the bicep template. That's obviously running Windows Server with Hyper-V. On that hypervisor, we're deploying two HCI nodes that are running the Azure Stack HCI operating system. And so this is a 2-node cluster that we're building. And then we're also deploying another Hyper-V server as a guest on that Azure host. And that Hyper-V itself is itself a nested hypervisor. And so what it's doing is it's running a domain controller, which we join the nodes to. It's building a Windows Admin Center, which is a core part of the HCI experience. And of course, it's also building this kind of simulated top of rack switch to help with the SDN aspects, the software defined networking aspects of the HCI solution. So that's kind of the architecture in a nutshell. If it's okay, I'd love to show a demo. What do you think?
Of course, let's see a demo. I think that one thing that maybe to be proactive about this for a second, maybe that's a question that will come, and we'd love to see, in the comments below. Let us know what you think. But this is a pretty beefy VM that we are deploying, and I think that showing this diagram kind of explain why we need that beefy VM. The fact that we're deploying so much stuff on top of that. But yeah, please go ahead, Dale. Show me the magic.
Yeah, so let's take a look at, first we'll look at HCIBox, a complete deployment from Azure Portal. And so you can see I'm in the portal here. I've got the HCIBox resource group open. And let's just kind of take a look at some of the resources we get out of the box. You can see I've got an HCI cluster. This is the registered cluster, as it shows up as a first-class resource in Azure. You can see I've also got some gallery images. So one of the things that HCIBox includes is Resource Bridge, which gives me VM lifecycle management through Azure Portal. And there's a custom location that's associated with that as well. I've got Kubernetes. So this is Azure, a Kubernetes service on HCI, where we see our workload cluster and our management cluster here as Azure Arc enabled Kubernetes resources. And then, of course, I've got some other resources like the Resource Bridge I mentioned earlier. We've got some, log analytics solutions that are enabling things like, cluster insights. And of course, our host itself, the HCIBox client, where, like you said, all the magic is happening. If I can, Lior, what I want to do is I want to scroll up and open the cluster itself.
Please.
So this is the cluster resource. Kind of get an idea of, just general lay of the land with the cluster. As we talked about in the diagram, when we're showing the diagram, it's a 2-node cluster. So you see the 2 nodes are here. They're obviously, as part of the registration process, they're Arc enabled. One of the things that I think is nice is the ability to monitor our clusters from the portal. So if I click on the Insights blade here, we'll be able to actually see, HCI Insights for this cluster here.
Mm-hmm.
I can see things like health faults or maybe performance of the VM or of the nodes themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So just a nice integration with the cluster there. Another thing that I can do is, because we've got Resource Bridge deployed, is I can manage VM lifecycle and even like doing things like create VMs, start, stop, change them, all from Azure Portal. And this is, I think, a really powerful feature. So can I show this to you?
Of course, please. I always love to look at VMs getting created.
When you can do it from Azure Portal on a cluster that's not in Azure, I think that's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and create a virtual machine. And again, this all comes with HCIBox. So everything you're seeing that I'm doing, you can do on your own, when you've spun one of these up for yourself. So I'll create a VM. I'm just going to drop it in the same resource group. I'll call it Linux guest, because who doesn't love a Linux guest? We'll leave, some of these as their default. You can see here, I can pick either an Ubuntu or a Windows image. So these images are fully customizable as part of the HCI product. In this case, with HCIBox, we're including 2 different images. And I'm just going to make this a really small VM with 1 core and 2 gigs of memory. So we'll go ahead and we'll click next to disks. We're not going to do any disk today. We're going to click next to network interfaces. I'll just create a new NIC for this VM. Let's call it NIC1. I'll put it in the virtual network that I've already got set up. Let's click add tags. I don't think we need any tags today. So we'll go ahead and review and create that VM. And so in case I want to connect to this VM, it is a Linux VM, I might need that private key. So I'll go ahead and just save that off. And then there we go. That kicked off my deployment. Awesome. And this is going to build an actual VM on the cluster.
That's sweet. So let me wrap my head around this for a second, Dale. So we are deploying a nested 2-node HCI cluster, right?
Yeah.
In addition, we also have a domain controller, which will support the authentication authorization, kind of simulating something that will happen in the wild, not just a work group environment. We also have the resource bridge, which will allow us to deploy the virtual machines on top of that nested HCI cluster, right? HCIBox. In addition, AKS, right? That is deployed on top of AKS on Azure Stack HCI, Arc enabled, everything spun up automatically for you.
That's right. Yep. That's exactly right. I like to think it's a beautiful thing. Others might disagree, but yep, it's all automatically done for you. Do we have time to take a look at inside the HCIBox client?
For you, always.
Awesome. Let's go ahead. I've got an RDP session already open. And so when you log into the HCIBox client, you're going to see, this view. And obviously we see the HCIBox wallpaper background. What I'll do is I'll open up Windows Explorer here. Let me show you the HCIBox folder where kind of all the goodies are. So if I look at this folder, you're going to see all the scripts, all the PowerShell automation that makes HCIBox possible. This is kind of the part of the demo that I like to point out, that all of this code, fully open source. I've actually had a number of folks already that were part of the private preview take this code and reuse it in their own applications. And we see this as a big, use case for customers and partners to reuse code from HCIBox. But you also can see some of the other goodies you get. We do things like we collect all the logs that you might need if you want to kind of review what happened, or if you have issues. All the logs are provided in a handy place. Of course, there's other little things that we include, like a link to the Windows Admin Center VM, where we can kind of take a look at, the cluster from Windows Admin Center. So you can see it here. I'm looking at Windows Admin Center, which is deployed as a gateway server. I can see some of those VMs that I've got running. Let's go see if I can see my Linux VM yet. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the blade here. But you can see, we've included a lot of kind of goodies here. It looks like my VM hasn't quite been created yet, but certainly it'll get there soon. Like I said, we've included a lot of goodies to kind of make your HCI experience complete in terms of all the different parts of the HCI ecosystem.
That's super impressive, Dell, and really super impressive demo. Every time that I see a demo like this, when shows the breadth of a solution, doesn't matter what kind of solution, show a breadth of a solution, it's always impressive. And obviously there is so much more to do in HCIBox that you haven't shown in the demo. Everything will be in the README for HCIBox that we are launching today. Obviously, it's going to be in the description below, all the details, everything that you need. Dale, just last question, as I'm thinking about HCIBox, what is the number one thing that you, as we were developing this, from the customers, from the partners that you've been talking to and the team been talking to, what do people are most excited about when it comes to HCIBox? Like, what is the future hold?
Yeah, I mean, far and away, the number one, I think the number one ask from partners, and, because I work with partners every day that are building solutions on this, and of course their customers, communicate the same to them, is that we need to get hands-on. I've got, an army of architects and engineers that are ready to get started, but we can't wait for hardware. We can't afford to wait for hardware. And on top of that, we don't want to, for natural reasons, it just makes more sense to try this out and to test things out and to learn in a virtual environment. And so by far and away, there's a big appetite for this. With what was previously available, it could work, but there was a lot of manual steps, and just having this one-click experience that's ready in literally a couple of hours is going to be a game changer for our customers and partners to get ready to go and to build awesome solutions with HCI.
Beautiful. I'm loving it. So, Dale, what is the best way for our community to interact with us when it comes to HCIBox and Jumpstart in general?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been awesome to see the growth of the Azure Arc community on GitHub. That obviously the GitHub repo that backs up the Arc Jumpstart project. It's been awesome to see that growth over the past 2 years. That's definitely the best way to get started. Check out the repo. We just recently started using the discussions feature of GitHub, where we can have healthy discussions about new capabilities, new scenarios, or just other commentary on the Jumpstart project. So definitely check out the Jumpstart repo, and that's the best way to get started.
Beautiful, Dale. Thank you so much for walking me through the HCIBox solution. For the Jumpstart audience, thank you so much for supporting us. I will keep saying that every Jumpstart Lightning episode that we are releasing. Let us know in the comments below. What do you think? How should we think about HCIBox? But obviously, like Dale mentioned, we are starting to interact more with GitHub discussions. So obviously, we're going to put that in the description below so you can check it out. Give us a big like, subscribe to the channel. As you can see, we're releasing more and more things, bringing people like Dale and the product and everyone around the community to come talk to us about their experience with Azure Hybrid, multi-cloud, Edge, and kind of everything is in between. Dale, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.